Hello and welcome to the PD3 Bovis Homes webinar for your CIPS November 2018 exam. The case study exam technique I'll go through first, and then we'll go on to some specifics around the actual case and unit content. Look at some statistics, definitions, and the most important thing, map the unit content, which again I've completed that, and there's a copy of it in your materials, a very important document. So map the case study material onto the unit content. This map is your application notes. Read the case paragraph by paragraph and copy relevant content with page references onto the unit content, and this will show any gaps and, more importantly, the likely areas for exam questions. Note, not all content from the case though can or should be mapped. So if outsourcing is mentioned or there is potential to outsource, then in section 1.4, the outsourcing of work, you would insert any details from the case study in there, and you end up with 4 sections of notes for each learning outcome. So these are what you'll refer to in your exam under the specific questions when you're looking for examples from the case. So for question 1, refer to your notes on LO1. If asked about outsourcing, look at your notes from the case and use theory and the case context to form your answer. For question 2, refer to your notes on LO2, etc, etc. So all questions you must refer to the case scenario or context. Don't just quote theory. You need to use theory though, but use it to be the basis of your answer to help your analysis. And remember, you've got your study guide and reference notes with you. The case study though is not a research essay. Try and only use material that's in the case study. Do not conduct extensive research on latest developments other than to provide ideas for evaluative commentary. The examiner doesn't want to know really what the latest changes are in the case organisation. So if Bovis have been taken over last week, we don't need to know that. So don't produce a bibliography, but do try and read some of the sources cited in the CIPS case study. So you'll find I've actually included those in the extra reading. So be careful about this extra reading. Limit it to the articles referred to in the text, or read further on some of the theories on lean or agile if you are not clear about them. General technique then, fairly straightforward. Answer the question in which you're most confident, answer in any order. Start each answer on a new page. Leave a space after completing, because this enables you to go back and review and perhaps add something. Leaving space also makes it easy for the assessor to see the points you have made clearly. Don't provide bulleted lists. Use sections or subsections for your answers, and leave a space between paragraphs. Very, very important. Don't indent paragraphs. Leave a line space. Watch out for the linked words such as this Nestle and its supply base. Some of the answers only talked about benefits for Nestle and missed out its supply base. Answer the question. Analyse 5 risks for each. Include their potential impact. So in fact there are 2 parts to this, the 5 risks and also their impact. But it did only want 5. Do not do more than what is required, because you will not be awarded marks. Explain how social factors and environmental impact on IKEA. Use examples. Weaker candidates wasted time by doing a full steeple. This was not asked for, so make sure you focus on the question. Use the case study in every answer. There are usually plenty of examples that can be cited, quoted, linked in to aid your analysis. Don't copy large chunks, reword. But you can use the context. So in this case it's the building trade, so you might say, in the building trade it is probably important that they have this and therefore this would lead to. So you can use the actual case or the context of the industry to cite your answer. Answer the question, relate to the case study, and there's another example over here of not linking to the case study and the candidates didn't attract high marks. Structure, generally do a small introduction, define key terms, main body, conclude. Start with an introductory statement to show you understand the question, define terms, write 4 or 5 well argued paragraphs, and argued means not writing descriptively. Make clear separate points and back up them statements with evidence from the case or from theory. And the so what test on the next slide is very important. Very important also is leave a line space and do a conclusion. So write finally, or in conclusion, in summary, overall. Perhaps use phrases like however, or the decision may depend upon. So use cautious language. Just simply go into the what. So the general guidance there is introduction, body, conclusions. This is probably for 15 marks plus questions rather than 5 and 10 mark questions. Command words can be important, but usually if it's 15 marks or more, the command word will be discuss or evaluate or assess. So these words here, assess, evaluate, examine, discuss, all mean you've got to write evaluatively. The one to be very careful on is the compare and contrast questions, which do require you to not just explain two things, but to also compare them. Timings, many students run out of time. Set a time, don't exceed it, stop, move on to the next question. You must do that. And good luck. So that's a very quick overview of exam technique. Very, very important on this, because if you are not organised and don't understand how to approach the case, it can lead to failure. This house bill, which is very important for speeding up production, and they sell prefabs into Westbury, Charles Church and Persimmon. So very important aspect that, where they've got clear segmentation. Red row pretty much expanding pretty content of the slides there. Of the key content of the case study. The next thing we'll look at is just some basic theory, and we'll do this by question. So we're going to look at some basic theory for each of the questions. So question 1 will be about the theory on this screen, which is relationships between levels of strategy, strategic supply chain management's contribution, market changes with our famous STEEPLE, and approaches to implement relationship management. So it's quite a broad area is this, and we'll look very briefly at some of the aspects in here, and then we'll look at the case study again. So 1.1 is about levels of strategy, supply chain management and corporate performance, profitability, huge in the case, and risks in the supply chain. We've got corporate level strategy is about the type of company that you're going to be, what products and markets you want to be in, and what sort of resources will be allocated about the different parts of the business strategy. Individual businesses are about how to compete in a particular market, and the business strategy is to compete in that market, and supporting that are the various functional strategies such as procurement, operations, marketing, etc. will be functional strategies to support the business strategy, which should be aligned to the corporate strategy. Different objectives there, that's quite good, how procurement objectives need to link into the corporate objectives. So that's a useful slide that links possible corporate objectives with more functional procurement supply chain objectives, and there's some key measures there that are very important. Strategic considerations, we need to look internally and we need to look externally and look at aspects of supply chain management and whether they fit with the environment and whether they fit with where the company's going. Supply chain management can increase revenue by being more agile, by being faster, by offering customised products quicker, more innovative products. Key to the case study, shareholder value, and Gatorner, who's quoted in the study guide, talks about the supply chain management can help give shareholder value by increasing revenue, by doing improved customer service, by lowering costs, by reducing working capital, by lowering materials and finished goods, by controlling fixed capital, the amount of money is tied up in assets, so reducing the need for as many physical assets. That's explained in that slide there, where the revenue, costs, working capital and fixed capital management lead to increased shareholder value. Next item on these slides, and there's obviously benefits from having a successful supply chain strategy, fairly straightforward. What risks are in supply chain? Well, this is taken from the risk management unit: supply, compliance, reputational, economic, a whole load of areas. Strategic supply risks, market complexity, vulnerability, supply availability, how well we've done our risk management, and there's the old risk management cycle from identify, assessing, allocate, implement, monitor. We need to understand supply chain risks, and that's what Bovis are trying to do now at the end of the case study. They're trying to understand suppliers and communicate with them. We might need to measure the risk by scoring the likelihood and impact and producing the old impact likelihood matrix, where we have risks that we must address, which are in the high category, and perhaps risks that we just need to keep an eye on, that are in low, and perhaps we'll use the red, amber, green traffic light system to decide on price. We may use the 4 T's as an explanation. So once we've assessed the risk, we can tolerate it, transfer it, terminate it, or treat it. The 4 T's, a very easy way of remembering possible strategy. How can risk be reduced with SCM? Many ways there. I won't read all those, but as a general question, that would give you a good basis for an answer of how supply chain management can help. It would need linking to the case study, but very good. Now we're on to one of the examiner's favourite, competitive advantage, and a couple of odd ones: BPO, outsourcing, offshoring, and quality methodologies. So competitive advantage, very, very important. And Porter says there is only 2 ways: low cost or differentiation. But there are 4 generic strategies to give you competitive advantage. You can either be a cost leader to the whole industry, or you can be differentiated to the whole industry by offering better service, better quality, etc. Or you could be low cost, selling to a narrow market segment, or you could be differentiated to a narrow segment, so you might only focus on selling to a particular demographic. So very important is Porter's theory of competitive advantage. You need a definition and you need to be clear on the generic strategies. I don't think anyone's low cost, it's just that Bovis have lost control of their costs. How can we reduce costs? Well, there's 5 measures there which are fairly straightforward to go through. Identify the drivers, probably map the supply chain, understand why the excess costs are there, focus, prioritise, develop strategies, review. So it's pretty much an improvement cycle. How can supply chain management help? Well, many ways. and there's 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 ways that supply chain management might seek to reduce costs. Reducing time to market, well, particularly manufacturing and products, mobile phones, developing new products quickly, very important. In this case, it's more how to build houses quicker and more efficiently. So it's probably the lead time from starting to completion is important. Differentiation can come from quality, branding, distribution across all major channels, consistent promotional support, advertising, etc. So brand recognition, very important. The supply chain can be a source of success if it's difficult for people to replicate. And we've got this very unusual topic called enterprise profit optimization, where companies can try and coordinate planning, integrating and executing all activities to make the best profits. So for a customer using EPO, pricing, forecasting and planning are integrated to help produce high levels of profit. So the benefits: increases revenues, improves efficiency, can stimulate demand to maximum, enhances profits, manages product life cycles, responds to changes. And certainly Bovis are doing this. If you read on their website, they're very proud of their price optimization methods. And price optimization are programs that calculate how demand varies at different price levels and then combine that data with information on costs and stock levels to recommend prices that will improve profits. So they can actually decide what mix of houses to have on a site, what sort of features that a house should have to maximise the revenue or sales price they can get from each building site. So Bovis are certainly cost optimising and they're price optimising, and if you remember in the case they talk about they are optimising their supply base. So not an easy topic, that optimisation, but have a read of the slides again, have a quick look at the notes there, and hopefully that will be a bit clear. Should we do in-house? How do we select suppliers? What are sourcing related metrics, etc. So these are decisions to optimise. Should we use international supply chains? Well, there are cost advantages, but there is the aspect of local resources and national to consider. International sourcing, won't read that, and there isn't really any obvious ones in the case apart from there's been inflationary pressure from goods coming in to the UK, so obviously quite a lot of raw materials could be imported. Benefits from international sourcing: local sourcing. Bovis are certainly trying to use more local suppliers, it says that in the case study. Low cost country sourcing, not really in the case study, but there are risks of using international suppliers mentioned at the end of this. And then we've got the outsourcing drive and the outsourcing matrix. And then the quality. There is a lot of quality problems in the case, and they're very reactive and trying to correct snags, and they're trying to move to be more proactive and be defect preventative by using probably better quality assurance, better quality control and quality management. So TQM's there, you've studied it times, there are benefits to QM. And then we've got the external market, which we'll assess through STEEPLE, and we're going to consider disruptive incremental change, markets, and we'll look at Porter's 5 forces, globalisation and risks of international minimum standards. So there's the internal environment and there's the micro environment, which would be the Porter's 5 forces, and the macro environment, which would be our STEEPLE. What are the steps in an environmental analysis? This is straight from the study guide: audit, assess, identify, look for opportunities and threats, establish your strategic position. And there are as many bits of analysis that can be done on the supply chain. Environmental, industry, competitor, success factors, forecasting, vendor analysis, they're all factors that we might consider in the supply chain. Steeple analysis, there's a huge steeple analysis that I've put in the case study. I won't go through that now, you can look at that at your own. There's some change in the case study, and this part of the syllabus talks about disruptive versus incremental change, and it's very arguable whether incremental change will be sufficient or whether they need radical change to improve performance. So a little bit there about planning, emergent change, complexity, and then we're on to this quite difficult topic of strategic alignment, which is new to this unit. You've not studied it on any other unit, although you will have heard the term that strategies must align. Vertical alignment and horizontal alignment, fairly straightforward. Every level should contribute towards the overall objectives. Is vertical, and horizontal is plans of every unit in a company or supply chain are coordinated, so you've got horizontal and vertical. Your study guide shows the strategy cascade that shows the interlinking of business goals to strategy to supply chain right through to supply chain capabilities. The study guide shows this alignment model from Gatorna, which is saying the external factors, processes in competitive situation and strategic response need to be lined up with the capability, culture and leadership style within the organisation. That is not an easy model to understand, and hopefully that strategic alignment question you could answer more possibly in terms of the other model that we showed on the previous slide. Strategic alignment, though, if it is asked, the better way to explain it I think would be to use the 7S framework. There is a bigger explanation in my main slides. This is an abridged version of the 7S's developed by Waterman and Peters, and it is saying that companies can be thought of in terms of the 7. What is important is they're all interconnected and everything needs to be aligned, so the model can be used to identify what needs to be realigned to improve performance or maintain alignment during other types of change. Well, obviously Bovis need to realign some of these S's to match the new shared vision they're trying to do. So identify the areas that aren't aligned, determine the design of the organisation, decide what changes should be made, make the changes, review S's. So it's a very good tool if the dreaded alignment question came up, and I would ask you to look at the full set of slides that has a little more detail in them. We need to integrate the supply chain with corporate strategy. It needs to there's a difference between transactional and relationship approaches, and obviously it's really adversarial versus the relationship spectrum you've done means, and there are obvious benefits of relationship management: better relationships, better risk management, better return on investment, potential for synergy, better CSR, competitive advantage, efficiency. What models can we use to manage relationships? Well, there's SRM, CRM, CPFR, partnership sourcing and supply development, all detailed in my revision notes and in the slide. CRM, rationalisation of the supply base. Well, there's quite a lot of rationalisation and optimisation going on in the case study, so that's certainly supply relationship management competencies. Well, we must be good at segmenting suppliers, measuring performance, working across the company, fostering a culture of collaboration and building capabilities. How do we implement SRM, and what is partnership sourcing? It's about developing trust and working to joint objectives. So these cover advantages of partnering, and then we've got the supplier development. whether we take a directive approach because of problems, tell, or whether we're more facilitative, depends on the situation. So there's a model here of supply development which they would expect you to repeat if you were discussing issues of supplier development, and there's it goes from through there to 9 steps of how you would put a program in. But there are costs and supply and issues needing emphasis, prioritisation, risk assessment, cultural gaps, how to develop trust. So we might need to integrate information in the supply chain to make it work. We might need to share, and there's various software, for example SAP, that can be used to help us coordinate a supply chain. Right, so that was a very quick overview of the theory. If we look at the unit content now, we've got a huge sort of area that's never been examined. You can see from there that the items in red have not been examined, and both those red ones could come up: quality improvement and enterprise profit optimization. We can also see 1.4 in red, never been asked. So there's quite a lot of areas never been examined yet. If we look at the past questions, there's a huge list there. And if we look at the bottom there, you can see the last question was from 1.3. The question before 1.2, 1.1, 1.2, 1.2, 1.1. And you can see there are no 1.4s. But on rotation, it's very difficult to estimate. Looking at that, there's no certainty which area will come up. But you can see competitive advantage has been asked 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 times. A very popular question. So possible questions: evaluate the extent to which supply chain management has impacted upon profitability at, well, of course it wouldn't be Home Depot, it would be at Bovis. 2 key risks in Bovis' supply chain: STEEPLE, supply chain management and competitive advantage, and how outsourcing might contribute to competitive advantage. So there, 3, 4 possible questions. I've sketched out a rough solution to one of them here. This is all the details in the case study of how the supply chain has caused problems which have impacted upon profits. So huge areas, and obviously you would quote some of these figures, and there's lots of detail there that you could cite. I've done a summary chart here of financial performance of Bovis versus Redrow here and Persimmon here. These are given in the case study, but they haven't included them in the table, so I've included a table here to compare. And we can see the revenue of all 3 are increasing, but Redrow's has gone up by 20%, Bovis by 11, Persimmon by 8. So they've all increased as a comment. Profit though has gone down, so it means their costs have gone up more in proportion. So their profits have fallen 3%, everyone else's has gone up massive 23%. Earnings per share has fallen at Bovis. Operating profit margin, the number of average house price, they're getting 10% more, whereas the others are only getting 7 and 3.8, and they're still losing money. A very important measure, return on capital, it fell 1.3 percentage points to 17%. From 18.3, and it's a key measure. It mentions it in the case several times. The other house builders increase, well, Redrow increased theirs by 24%. It doesn't give the details Persimmon. So this is a very broad comparison of financial performance of the 3 companies, and obviously you can take that in with you. You don't have to learn that, but it's a useful summary. What are the risks in the supply chain? Well, there are several. I've just given you a broad brushstroke there. Skills, slave labour, increasing prices, lack of effective supply chain management, the logistics still needs sorting, many delays causing on costs, quality, risks. There are many risks, and talking about that, Bovis say we mapped our supply chain to identify areas of high risk, and I've tried to work with suppliers on their processes and modern slavery, and questions on whistleblowing. So this is ethical and sustainability risks, reduce the number of recruitment agents we use to get better manage of labour, appointed an external recruitment process to make it fairer, rolled out training programs for subcontracts as on topics with an assessment of modern slavery. So that's a specific area of risk assessing. How can supply chain management contribute to competitive advantage? Well, at Persimmon they've got this company that we mentioned already, Space4. The unit content suggests CA can come from cost, quality, time to market, product and service differentiation, and Porter suggests there are two sources and generic strategies that can be followed, briefly discussed there. But the Space4 company supplies components straight to these companies, and it enables them to build quicker, lower costs, give more energy efficient products, should be easier to plan out site deliveries, could be a form of differentiation. And Persimmon have three market segments: the traditional homes with Persimmon, the executive homes, Charles Church, and affordable security housing, Westbury Partnership. So they've got clear differentiation, and that Space4 is very important. We will come back onto Space4 later. Okay, a previous question was asked going back to 13. Explain a systematic process that Mattel could follow. Well, this can be explain a systematic process that Bovis could apply to analyse its supply chain environment, and the core answer from the examiner's report is there in front of you. But this isn't what the content of the PESTEL is. That is, how would you go about the process of establishing the position in the external environment. Likely areas. If we move on to section 2 now, I'll try not to spend too long on theory, but an important area is segmentation. Then there is the value added and logistics. We've also got transport locations, and we've got the examiner's favourite lean and agile, which you must be very, very, very clear of because it's in the case study and could be examined. So what is segmentation? Well, Kotler give a definition. Requirements for market segmentation, it has to have all those factors. So we select the customer to serve, we target specific customers and decide on a value proposition. So that's how the marketeers would create targeted valuations. So we can sell the same product to everyone, we can try and differentiate, we could try and look for niche marketing, or we could do micro marketing. I think this diagram explains it much better. We sell the same product mix to everybody, the whole market, or we have a different product for each segment, or we simply have a product that's developed for one segment and we just completely concentrate. And we can segment by demographics, psychographics, geographic, consumer type, business type, market type, sector. We can also in businesses segment by operating characteristic, purchasing approaches, situational, personal characteristics. There is a framework in the textbook called PADI which can be used for segmentation. It is a very, very difficult model to understand, and I would keep well clear unless there was a specific question that named it. How do we develop the product service mix? Well, this is central to the case study of what products to offer, what type of housing, what features to offer, and to what customers. The Ansoff matrix is used in marketing to explain growth strategies. So companies can grow by penetrating the market, by product development, by diversification, or by market development. And there isn't really anything in the case on the need, I don't think, for new products. Maybe more energy efficient, more sustainable, but they're in house building. Their decision is what houses for which segment. So there are various strategies that go with that Ansoff matrix. There is a Boston matrix which talks about having a balanced portfolio of products. So all companies need cash cows that generate money and you don't have to invest much in them. You hopefully have got products that are in growing markets which are going to be future cash cows, and we might have question marks that could turn into stars, and we need to have a balance in our portfolio. It is linked to product life cycle as the Boston matrix, and it's a marketing. We can segment suppliers through Pareto, through Kraljek, through supply positioning and tiering. So very important. We can identify strategically significant suppliers through the Kraljek matrix, and that's some of the factors that would make them strategic. We might tier the suppliers and have tier 1 suppliers who we deal with, and that means we can have partnerships, and then they will manage suppliers. Tiering's mentioned again. We need to take a strategic perspective of chains. Network theory, I don't think. Need to understand Porter's value chain and how value is added, and again this isn't a new model, worked well. And the value, how can supply chain help add value? Well, through value engineering, lean supply, agile supply, and maybe better network relationships that add value. And certainly collaborative partnership arrangements are huge in this. How do we do a value added flow chart when we're mapping the supply chain? Well, that's how we do it. We might also do value chain analysis and look at all the linkages and value adding activity. Thomas and Tang give us some success factors that we need in science. We need to consider the channel design in logistics, the flow path, the physical network, and the integration and collaboration strategy. That looks horrendous, but it's pretty much part of the case study as to how to configure the logistics networks for these housing complexes that are in big cities. We can integrate with our suppliers, we can integrate forwards, we can integrate backwards, and we need to identify process flows, and certainly their production process is not fit for network optimization is not really in the case. I don't think there isn't logistics, so I won't go to network optimization, but it is about looking at the most efficient place to have your warehouse and planning routes. In repeats, sorry about that, and a bit more net reverse not really in the case because we don't get returned houses, but there might be waste on building sites that needs closed loop supply chains. And we've got a little more content. How do we design the channel? Do we use wholesalers, distributors, agents? Well, again, I don't think that's relevant for this. So we can do the different channel designs there. Logistics flows, things to consider. Customer service cost, plant cost, etc. Distribution centres could be important in this case study, and I'll come on to that there maybe is a need where the main suppliers deliver in and then the bulk is broken and consolidated and delivered to the building sites. So that's the sort of arrangement that could help, and instead of the factories these would be building sites, and that would cut down the amount of transport going to each building site. We might use a third-party logistics provider, so you need to understand what a 3PL is and what they can offer. There's a bit more on 3PL and a more advanced concept of 4PL, and that's a bit more on 4PL. Choice of transport is not relevant. Challenges of transport, slightly relevant. Congestion, noise, timing, not really relevant. Lean thinking is, lean's always relevant. So we need to understand about value, the value stream, and try and create pull lean just in. So we need to eliminate waste, and we've got Tashiono's 7 waste there: transport, inventory, motion, etc. Massive in the case. JIT, we know what JIT is. Limitations. Benefits of lean, pretty strong benefits. Requirements for agile supply chains, streamlining physical flows, synchronizing information, exploring specialist, fourth party logistics maybe, measuring, recognizing we need it to be responsive. So there's a difference there between agile and lean, and the famous chart that shows if the volume's stable, you might be able to have lean, where there's not a lot of variety and demand is predictable, but with high variety or variability we probably need an agile supply chain. So very, very important. For an agile supply chain you need those 4 features. There's a variation on that other graph which talks about lead time and demand certainty, and again in here we've got lean, and a hybrid one there, legal, which could possibly work in the supply chain. So there are variations on lean and agile, and there's yet another chart which shows some slightly different grids. How do we determine demand? Demand for the final product or incorporated demand. Well, on this, demand is fairly predictable, I think, in the market. Causal events, there aren't really any causes in the case study. Technique really need for this case study. So we're on to the questions at last. A whole range of questions there. You can see segmentation has been asked 1, 2, 3, I think 4 times now, so it's a popular question and it's quite an easy question. Lean and agile has been asked 2 or 3 times. Come up, how can segmentation be used? 5 challenges for logistics. Similar question and aspects of lean or agile. I didn't do the exact question, but that they could just be a general question on discuss the need to be lean or agile in the supply chain in construction. So how could we do it? Well, you could do demographics because of the housing they talk about, old age retirement homes, newly homes, people who haven't got much money. Socio-demographics, so they're possible methods. Spend, so income, if you've got high income, executive housing. The case study talks about the need to develop products for particular segments, and it also talks about the customers. So there's massive content in the case study about segmentation. Not so much the supply chain, there's a little bit, but mainly on the customer marketing side, the downstream part of the supply. Logistics, there is huge amount of logistics in the case study, and I've done a very detailed slide there of all the issues in the case study. So you need to get your head around that very carefully. Now, we could use the last planner, which is a system that's mentioned somewhere in the case, of a way of scheduling what's needed at the last chance you get rather than at the time you thought it was going to be wanted. So the last planner is an approach which can get around some of the problems of project planning. And my proposed solution in the case study, which is cited in some of the construction textbooks, is that the suppliers really should be delivering to storage or regional distribution centres, and then the project manager on the site, the construction manager or the builders, pull in what they need that day, that week from the interim storage, rather than the big suppliers dropping stuff off the site when it was originally ordered. It means the project site can plan deliveries better, reduce the amount of vehicles, etc, etc. And that's pretty much their detail there. You can call them CCCs, RDCs, but it means each building site won't get several vehicles, and it means if Bovis control rather than outsource this logistics, they will have complete control as to when they deliver and how they deliver. So that is, I think, and it's you could say that's a lean concept because they're pulling just in time, so it fits in with a lean supply chain. It reduces waste, it reduces transport, it reduces costs, etc. There's a lot to be said for that suggestion. Product, they can get benefits of bulk purchasing, standard specifications, long-term contracts, etc. That's from the Space4 website. So the benefits there: traditional construction could be maybe 3 weeks versus Space4 1 week, reduces need for skills, costs, optimised purchase. So something there, and a bit more on benefits of prefabrication. Important. So a couple of aspects there in the supply chain, and we're on to section 3 now, which is about collaboration again. And this PADI framework repeats. There's the change agent, which is big in the case. There's the dreaded KPIs, which are huge in the case study, and then this rather obscure knowledge skills one here. And we can see that 3.4 has never ever been examined. Can you see that bullet point there? Supply chain evolution from transactional to collaborative. That's been a question on once. Question 3 before. So how old? Well, it's gone from the old ways to the new ways. In the study guide it shows the Gatorna model, how it's transformed from functional to industry networks. Or used the model from Accenture, which is in your textbook, which moves from optimization to integration to collaboration. Or there is this one here from Accenture. You don't need all 3, 4, but you need to be able to talk about different levels and integration of supply chains. So information, resources and linkages can be shared. Problems of adversarial, drivers of collaboration. Well, there's many drivers to study, and you can have various ways of working and sharing out the gains from adversarial collaborative to adversarial by collaborative planning, working together, and there isn't a lot. The PADI frameworks here again, very difficult topic, and I don't personally think it's got much relevance, but be careful, it is named in the unit content. If it did come up, you've got it in your textbook, so don't worry, but I can't see how we can apply it to the case study, so I've not attempted. Shared services aren't really in the case, although it looks like Bovis have procurement in different divisions, and that they haven't got a shared services procurement, but they're more outsourcing their activities to cut costs than developing shared services. Services there, and then we're on to the change management, which is new to some of you. So we need to communicate with stakeholders, why communication plans fail, what techniques can we use to communicate with stakeholders. Very straightforward. Who are the stakeholders? You have done this several times. What do we do with stakeholder analysis and management? Well, we identify, we prioritise, and we understand by doing stakeholder management. We can map stakeholders with the infamous Mendeley matrix, and we could classify them as partners, allies, fellow travellers, etc., which is the Egan classification. Not necessary to learn. Vision is important in change management. It has a major role to play, and certainly the new chief exec is establishing a new how to get to the vision. Well, it's business-led, segmented, cost-aware, integrated, and then how do we change behaviour as well? We're trying to change behaviours in the case study, and there is a process there mapping how to proceed. So that's a useful behaviour change. Why do people resist change? Well, it can be individual reasons or organisational reasons, and Mullins gives you the standard sort of reasons which you could apply to the case study and cite more. How do we deal with resistance? Well, we can go softly right through to adversarial, and you would move down this, but it would depend on the urgency and the type of change. But these 6 appear in your leadership, your strategic management. Them 6 ways of dealing with resistance are very important. Then the theories of change. The most popular model is the Lewin model, where you unfreeze the behaviour, you try and change behaviours, and then you try and lock it in. So this is a 3-step model. My model though, and I think the one more appropriate for your exams, is the Cotter 8-step model, where you establish urgency, prioritise change, form a coalition of stakeholders, create the vision, communicate it, empower, create quick wins, consolidate, institutionalise, go back to step 1. It fits the case study, and you could use this to describe how the new chief executive is managing the change by changing the structure, going round all the divisions, stressing the need to change. So that model is very, very important. Why do we consult and engage? Fairly straight. What styles of leadership? Well, we need a transformational leader. Bovis need to change. Transactional is okay in stable environments. So we've got a charismatic new chief executive who's hopefully going to change. But the syllabus mentions the role of a change agent. Well, the change agent are the temporary change executive and the new chief executive. And he's an expert from outside, so he's going to have respect, he's going to have a new fresh pair of eyes. So there are many benefits of bringing in somebody from outside to lead the and then we've got the KPIs, survey and scorecards. Why do we measure supply chains? Benchmarking types. Yes, I know you've done it many times, but it has been asked. How do we benchmark? Well, there's a 5-step process. We can benchmark against the SCORE model, which is a very popular supply chain benchmarking instrument. There's a bit more on SCORE. We might do joint appraisal. We can get feedback on change programs by following those objectives. SMART. KPIs need to link to CSFs, and we can measure at different levels in the company, from the operational level right up to the strategic level, and there are some areas there and measurements that we could use. Within the company we could use MBO, but not really. Perhaps appropriate study. There is the balanced scorecard, which was developed by Kaplan and Norton, which is more for measuring company performance, not suppliers. And rather than just measuring financial results such as profits, we look at customers, internal processes and learning and growth. So it's said to measure hard, soft, leading, lagging, forward, back, etc. It gives us a balanced view. A logistics scorecard could be measuring quality, time, cost and relationships. So that would be maybe a balanced scorecard for logistics. How do we develop a scorecard? Well, there's some steps and some possible metrics under 4 areas: operational cost, time and response, profitability and customer service, with the key areas that we're going to measure. How do we gather the data? Fairly obvious, I think. Vendor rating is a way of measuring existing suppliers, which they don't seem to be doing. And then we've got the very difficult knowledge management training. So there's a few slides on what management, how knowledge community, how do we supply chain knowledge management, how do we do it, the learning organisation, learning, and how do we develop supply skills, training needs analysis. I'm sure you're all familiar with performance and training needs analysis. And certainly there's some training mentioned in the case study for suppliers and within house. We can do a per SWOT. We can do off training, on training, and we can do how effective training. That section is very general, never been examined, and you can probably see why. Past questions there, fairly wide ranging, and I think the question areas are performance measures, describe the stakeholders, explain how they would communicate with them, explain how you might use a balanced scorecard, and a range of methods to measure performance in Bovis to improve efficiencies. Have a look at those. I've put together some measures that you might want to suggest, from sales revenue, number of builds, sustainability, ethical. So I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. There are more, but I've got 10 obvious ones there. The last time this was asked, not on Bovis, it says candidates could have chosen 5 of these measures. They aren't the same. Justified why each is important, but many candidates misunderstood the question performance measures and simply discussed performance management methods such as benchmarking, dashboards and scorecards. So be very, very careful that you read the question correct. This is taken from Bovis's annual report. Now, strictly we shouldn't do too much research, but it's useful to see what KPIs they're actually using and the areas that they're measuring: people, community, environment, health and safety, and they've got targets here on waste reduction. So strictly this is not in the case, but it's useful back. They use the red, amber, green to signal how well they're doing on each one, and they've set some priorities for this year on how to improve, but this is quite high level measures, not necessarily supply chain measures, but they're areas that they've set that are publicly available on their annual report. Methods to measure performance. There are a number of methods that could have been used, such as score, joint performance, benchmarking, KPI, etc. So be careful. This is the answer, not to be confused with the KPI ones. Question 4's. Well, question 4 is any question from section 1, section 2, section 3. But there is a danger one. 4.2 was asked in 2014 about the strategic plan, which is this 4.2 here: develop a strategic plan. The study guide on page 252 details what might be in a strategic plan: background, business need, justifies, demonstrates, techniques. They're the 3 bullets from the content, and then there. So the questioning 3 years ago was about what might Apple consider when they're developing their supply chain plan, and some people gave this as the answer, and this isn't what they need to consider. This is what they do when they made the plan. The question was about considerations. So be very careful if something comes up on supply chain plan. It could be aspects of what you'd consider, so make sure you know these bullets, but the main questions have come from section 1, section 2, section 3. Notes here talks about optimizing your supply base. So what is optimization? It is about changing your supply base, bringing in better contractors, getting rid of contractors. It's generally reducing the number of suppliers. A definition of supply chain, definition of improvement, and then a concept about flows in the supply chain must go right from end. If the supply chain is going to work, there must be processes that run upstream and down. This slide is illustrating the bullwhip effect, which means if the end demand is 100 and then the demand changes to 95, it maps back through the supply chain what happens to that. So the 95 stays the same, so the end customer reduces their demand from 100 to 95, but the net effect, if you follow what happens, is the per third level supplier, his orders go from 100 to 20 to 180 to 60. You can see it amplifies through the supply chain. So the original equipment manufacturer cuts back production. Because they had 100 in stock, they only make 90, so they've got 95 for next time. Because they've only made 90, this supplier cuts back to 80. This supplier now only makes 60, this supplier now only makes 20. So if you work that through, that's the infamous or famous bullwhip effect, which we're trying to get rid of in supply chains through open communication and transparency. So if everyone stocks a wheat stock and doesn't know what the customer's doing because there's no communication, this is what would go on. That's the bullwhip effect. We looked at